Senator Denis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I mean, a lot of work has been put into this. How long has this been in development?
I probably started thinking about this 6 to 8 weeks ago. I was seeing that your work was coming to conclusion, and the thing that I could not figure out is how this was going to actually get done. And I talked with Tom about it, and we came up with this proposal. We shared it with Senator Roberson and also John Villardita, and with some other business people, and to get their ideas about it. But it's probably been 6 to 8 weeks.
And I appreciate that, because I know that you have talked to some of these individuals, you know, over the last month or so. I get to see this for the first time yesterday. Didn't get to give any input or anything on there. Now we've got a proposal before me, and I feel like, you know, everything's already been done, and somebody wants me to rubber stamp it or something. But you know, you've got some great individuals on here, which I think are great. But you know, this whole implementation, half of these organizational teams would be made up of parents. And I understand that probably most of these people that you have on here are parents. But they're not individuals who on a day-to-day basis are working with parents and trying to get input from parents and understand that process. All of these individuals are coming from a different aspect, which I think are great. But I think, you know, having that parent participation, and there's, I come from a PTA background where we spent a lot of time going into classrooms, going into talking with parents, working with parents, and I just don't see this succeeding without having that input there. You know, people can say, and I've seen this from, you know, in many educational things, not just here but across the country. People will say, oh, you know, they're a parent, they have kids, so that qualifies them to give that input. And I think we need to have somebody on here that's what they do. You know, to have that parent participation on there. I don't know if you want to make comment on that.
My wife is a former PTA president, so I'm very familiar with the work that they do. The purpose of this committee really was, as I mentioned earlier, and we want to be very clear, that we're talking about the management and the operation of the organization, the educational piece, what goes on in the classroom, the interaction with those parents and the teachers and principals. It's really kind of a different situation. We need to understand and make sure that they're set up, but I don't know that we necessarily need to get involved in that actual interaction.
I thought
that was the thought process,
yeah,
Senator Denis.
I thought somewhere in here I read that there was going to be some coordination with, and maybe it was in the budget, services related to community outreach. Isn't that a piece of this?
Yes, and
is it only the administrative part?
I touched on that a little bit when I talked about all these different groups who are working on something around K through 12 education. The problem is that it's been so hard to break through. I think having this implementation console in place will allow for a repository for those ideas. It'll help us to kind of sort those out and put the ones in that we think can be most effective in the near term.
So is it only implementing the logistical pieces of this happening? Is that what you're saying? That this implementation group would do? Like, how do you put together finances for this? How do you put together, you know, how do you organize meetings? I mean, I'm trying to get my arm around how that would work.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Senator, part of the first 60 to 90 days of this is actually putting all of that together, right? This is a very heavy lift, and so we've actually had lots of conversations with just myself personally, with people in the community about this 394 implementation. So there's a whole process that has to happen over the next 90 days. We will identify those individuals. The kind of structure of the council The council will meet on a monthly basis. It has to meet in a public hearing forum. Those meetings will be held here. Public testimony and input will be taken, and we will supply information to the council. The council will then supply information back to this advisory committee. It'll be a very, very, very transparent process so that the community has as much input as they want into the process. The community will have as much opportunity to testify. The goal here is to do what we did with economic development. That framework worked extremely well. The more people you have participating in the process, so when we were doing economic development here, and I've done this in other parts of the country, we had over 400 people sitting around a table talking about the future of economic development. In my mind, that's the goal we should have here. So I'm really impressed with the number of people that are actually here today for this meeting to talk about implementation of this. So the first, as I said, the first 60 to 90 days is to start identifying who those people are and laying out the process by which we do. The first meeting, Glenn has, should the committee approve this today, Glenn has suggested that the first meeting be October 26th here at the Grant Sawyer Building. That will be a public hearing where we will set up at that time the organizational structure and set the committee in full and begin to move the process forward.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate that, but as I look at the list here, talking about this discussion we're having, I mean, we have teachers represented, we've got community groups represented, we've got, so I'm just, once again, just saying, I think that there needs to be a parent rep that's there looking out for the parents. And that's just something that I've always fought for the last 30 years, because I think it's important to have that voice, and those voices are out there. But, if somebody had asked me about it, I probably would have given that input before, but nobody gave me a call or anything. I didn't know anything about this, and yet you've been working on it for 6 weeks. I understand you did try to call some of the folks, but I didn't get a phone call. I think that we definitely need to have some type of implementation. I don't disagree with that. I think that for this to really succeed, there has to be something there in place. And I guess I'm just probably more reacting just because it's the first time I'm really seeing this and trying to understand and grasp it. So that's all I have for now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Denis. Vice Chair Diaz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for wanting to improve our school district as much as every single person on this side of the dais has. I know that Senator Denis and a lot of my colleagues got involved in the political process because they wanted a better outcome for their kids in their districts. And that's why we are here, making sure that we can do, and we show that we can do better by them. One thing that keeps coming to mind is, I think that the scope of the work that you're putting together is too broad. I think it needs to be focused and finite. I keep replaying the scenarios of No Child Left Behind in my head. When I was in the trenches, we gave it a whirl and said, schools need to be more like businesses. They need to show that they are meeting the targets. We need to have all of our kids performing at a same percentage. This needs to happen now. The thing was, the metrics helped us see where we were missing the mark, but we never actually did anything to improve the quality and the practices of our teaching in the trenches. So we were constantly scrutinizing our schools, saying, shame on you, your Latino ELL subgroup fails, you're failing your African American subgroup, look at these numbers, they're atrocious. But we never ever got to the root of the problem. And what I'm seeing here is there's a lot of dabbling in many different areas. And I think your expertise would be greatly used if we look at strictly central office operations and how in this new system we can fine-tune them, improve them, make them better. But I really don't think we need to go anywhere beneath the central services at this point. I think if we truly are talking about reorg and giving the power back to those administrators and giving that power back to the teachers and giving that power back to the parents to ensure that we have schools that are building a sense of community, I think let's empower them, let's embolden them, and let's give them that support that they need to make that vision come true. But in my head, as I'm reading the changes that you seek, I think it would behoove everyone if we just focused on central services, because that's going to be a huge shift. So currently, the structure is everything top down, but now we're inverting it and everything's going to be bottom up. So how is the district going to do that huge paradigm shift? And I think that the best way to use your experience, your background, would be in that area. And then after we figured out the logistics with maintenance and all those other numerous things in terms of purchasing, and there's so many. How do you provide professional development? How do you ensure that everything is ready on call in the queue for when a school requests it? I think that's a big enough project. I don't think we need to necessarily go, because I know that the school district has a pretty darn good communications team. They're everywhere, they're spreading the word. We have a FACES department that engages families. And so I'm thinking if we can be intentional and purposeful and strictly keep the scope of this work to central services, it will do, I think, light years and wonders for how it's going to have this effect, which everyone is panicking about at the school level. Just like my colleague, Senator Denis, we would have appreciated kind of receiving the information before yesterday, kind of, sort of, and then seeing it all before us, because we could have helped fine-tune and kind of give you perspectives of some of us who have been in the trenches teaching, have had the state representatives walk into our buildings. But I think that the most effective use of your time would be at the central offices, and I hope that you guys could really think about that, because I think that there's a huge shift that's going to be happening now.
One of the first things that Tom and his team are going to do is come in and evaluate exactly where we are on all these things. It may well be that you're right. We haven't been in there yet. We've got some pretty good ideas about things we think that should happen, but to actually come in and do an assessment, develop a strategic plan around what we want to do, we'll be able to have a better, after 30 days, we'll have a better idea of exactly what we think we can accomplish.
Okay, so then another question is, what are the metrics to measure the efficiency of the work? Because I kind of see that we kind of lay out there what we want to do, but teachers' effectiveness is measured through their evaluation tool, so do the administrators have an evaluation process. What is the evaluation process that's before us here to make sure that this investment is going to be a good investment, one, and two, because I think that if you start with the end in mind and you know what you're shooting for, I'm preaching to the choir because you guys are business folks and I'm just a teacher, but I think we need to know what are we trying to accomplish from the outset, and then how do we measure the effectiveness so that when we come back and say maybe we want to continue this, this is why we want to continue this, because we showed these, that we complied or we reached our goal or whatever the evaluation tool will be. So what do you envision that being?
Envision that being a process. Talking with the school leaders, talking with senior leadership at the district. You're exactly right. What is it that we're trying to accomplish here? What is it that we're trying to develop? But right now, there's a lot of different metrics, but nobody knows exactly what they are. Maybe we can provide some structure around that. We would want to talk with these folks and together develop something that actually is important in terms of determining what success really means. I think that's a process that I've seen kind of lacking at times. Nobody defines what it is. How do you define success at the end of the day? What are the metrics that we should put in place? Having that discussion, I think, will be very important for AB 394 to be successful. Sitting here today, I don't know what they are. Tom and his team, and I'll be working closely with them. That's one of the first things we need to look at. Is what is it that we're measuring, and are we following the right things for the outcomes that we want to see?
And I guess my last point would be, Mr. Chair, that as we see the progress that's being made toward identifying those schools that are on the list for achievement school districts, they have defined exactly what that process is, what they're looking for, what the categories are. And one of the criticism that I've gotten back about the scope of our work on the reorg is that we haven't been very clear as far as what we're looking to accomplish, what the end game is going to be about. What are those finite bullets that we will know we did our job on this committee because we held these meetings, but it's still very fuzzy in a lot of people's minds. They don't understand what this reorg means, and it's very confusing. But I think that if we already have notions and ideas and concepts and know what's good for kids, then we should already have a frame of reference by which we keep ourselves in check.
I agree. I think that we will be able to help structure those kinds of things. You're thinking like a business person. That's good. And I lived with an educator, so I had the benefit of understanding the way that educators think. But what I have found is that they do think differently about things. When you get them together, good things happen because they look at things from a different perspective. For this effort to be successful, it's got to be very collaborative. Our proposal is not intended at all to come in and say, this is what it is. We're running the place now. That won't work. We have to work collaboratively to get an outcome. We saw that happen at the Education Council. We know that business people and educators can work together. That's the goal here.
Senator Harris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some questions for you around your budget. As I'm looking at the educational policy development budget and the financial consultant services budget, together those are almost a third of the budget that you put together. And in the footnotes or down below the budget, a lot of those monies are designated as an hourly rate to a consultant for $350 an hour. And as I calculate the number of hours that equals and the long-term ramifications of this project for being a year, I'm a little curious. I'd like a little more explanation about, first of all, why the consultancy services have to be on call. Second, who it is that you anticipate will be hired to provide these consultancy services, how it is that you arrived at an hourly rate of $350 an hour. Is there another way perhaps that you could hire a consultant that could, are you anticipating these will be office hours 8 to 5? Are they going to be attending after hour meetings of the committee? I'm just very confused as I look at your budget and look at that dollar amount of $350 an hour and then the on-call. So I'd just like a little more explanation about what you anticipate, what your vision is as to how you're actually going to use these dollars and who it is you're anticipating you're going to hire.
Senator, I think I can answer that. That's for Mike Strambitsky.
So he would be the sole consultant on both the education policy development and the financial consultant services?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Senator Harris, the way we put that together is in the event that we needed on-call services, and the fact that if we needed financial consultants, for example, to come in and take a look at something, as Mr. Christensen pointed out earlier, since we've put this budget together, the accounting firm of Fair Anderson and Langerman stepped forward when Veronese wanted to be a part of this process, and we were trying to get some millennials involved and CPAs involved in the process, they agreed to provide that service. So in the event that we have to hire any outside financial consultants, in the event that we need to bring Mr. Strambinski back to participate in this, or we have to bring in another education consultant, that's what that is there for. So they would be on call. That, in my opinion, it's not 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. Those would be individuals that we would need. We might need them for a month. We might need them for 6 weeks. We might need them for 2 months. The budget that we prepared, we're hoping that we don't have to spend the whole amount. That's the goal. But what we prepared for you was what we think this effort is going to take. And that's what you have before you today. My goal is to tell you that as a fiscal conservative, we would not spend all of the money that is in that budget. That's why we put in there specifically as needed and on call.
And I appreciate that. I just wondered if there's any thought that's been put into hiring someone maybe on a project basis once you have a better idea as to what the scope of the work is, so that we're not just looking at a $350 per hour rate for a consultant. Maybe as you're identifying what the challenges are, or you find that maybe the district needs some financial consulting, that you could hire somebody to sit down and work on it on a project basis where the hours are a little more flexible, but we have a sum certain, and we're not just paying $350 an hour for as long as it takes that consultant to do whatever they're doing. It's more of a scope of work bound by contract, so that there's some fiscal management there, I guess, with regard to the use of the consultant.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Senator Harris, I couldn't agree with you more. I've hired and fired a lot of consultants in my day. I am one and have been hired and fired a lot. And it comes down to that fiscal responsibility. So I don't look at having someone there full time. We may need to bring someone in to work on an education piece for 2 months. We may have to bring in a financial person for 2 months. It would be an on-call, project-by-project basis. And so we're not looking at spending all of that money in that category right up from the beginning. I don't run my company that way. So when I hire consultants to work on projects with me, I hire them on a project-by-project basis.
But I guess at least for me then, I would like to see maybe if you do have to go to outside consultants because it's beyond the expertise of the board that's been put together, perhaps use of many consultants on a limited basis where there's a scope of work and a contract around what it is that they're going to accomplish, so that it's not just a run-on of expenses.
I was just asked by the Secretary to make sure when the witnesses are testifying, please just restate your name so they have for the record. Thanks. Assemblywoman Neal.
Thanks. So I have a couple of questions. So I'll kind of tag on Senator Harris. So on the budget page, you guys said development of policy documents. I wanted clarity on that because I want to know what kind of policy documents will you be doing, and how is that power, number one, delineated to you, and shouldn't that be in the hands of somebody else, such as CCSD, Board of Trustees, or even the legislature in and of itself? So I needed an explanation on what that meant. That's my first question.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, to Assemblywoman Neal, I'd like to introduce Michael Vanozzi from my office, who will be administering a significant portion of this. Michael has spent the better part of his career working in education policy and implementation. It's a passion for his. He's the one that created the Education Council for us at the Economic Alliance, and will be the lead project manager for us on this effort. So, Michael, if you could answer the Assemblywoman's questions, please.
For the record, Michael Vanozzi, TSC Squared Group. So, kind of echoing to what Senator Harris said, Senator Neal, we are looking at doing a number of or probably will have to do a number of projects, project-based sort of policy initiatives. So, Dr. Strembitsky, for example, could be, doing a project-based initiative or just on-call consulting, and other, organizations that we could bring in potentially like Cornell or, the school district has a great relationship with Harvard University. They could be really, really helpful in the development of certain policy documents and the way to look at these things. So I think that between the expertise at TSC Squared and the expertise that will be brought on from an outside perspective, I think that a lot of the documentation and the thought that will be brought to fore will be included in that portion of the budget.
May I have a follow-up? So let me ask the question a different way. The scope of the policy you intend to get involved in, because that's really broad. I want to know if you're somehow entrenching or stepping into areas that have not been delegated to you. Do you have the authority to do it because it should be something that is being done by the trustees? Don't they do policy governance already? Don't they have staff create policy documents in which they will then implement and then push forward?
For the record, Michael Venozzi, Assemblyman Neal, that's a great question. I think what we would be doing is we would be drafting and proposing and going through the necessary, proposing those policies if they become necessary, and then going through the appropriate due process that for any of those policies, any and all of those policies. So this is a public body that oversees and is given direction and developed regulations for the for the reorganization of Clark County School District. Clearly, the CCSD Board of Trustees has certain roles and other roles, but I think we would be developing and proposing, and we would go through that due process as necessary.
Okay. Next question. In the presentation, this is the one that's color-coded up here. You guys said that what needs to happen, and I'm not clear on if you will be doing it, projections for the individual school enrollment and the method of approaching the weighted funding formula. Isn't that already being done by somebody? Why does that need to be done by you?
Again, for the record, Michael Venozzi, through you, Chairman, to Assemblyman Neal, that is an accounting of what all needs to be done through the regulation. It is, so if you, and maybe we didn't do it or word it exactly correctly, but the intent was to show what all needs to happen as far as this regulation goes. Our role is to generally assist in several different aspects, primarily related to business administration at the central administration level.
My next question, and maybe this is just your future foretelling of what needs to happen, but it says just some of the things that need to be done in the next 30 days. Resolve how CCSD and NDE are going to treat the weighted funding formula until it is fully implemented by Nevada legislatures. So what's not clear here is, what is your role? What is the scope of that role? And where did you get the expertise to engage in that policy discussion?
Michael Venozzi, again, for the record. Assemblywoman Neal, that is an accounting of what needs to take place. Again, there is a lot of facilitation and things that need to happen between now and then. But as the superintendent remarked in his earlier testimony, that is an unresolved issue at that time.
So just for clarity for the record, you will not be in the business of this particular discussion, or will you?
It's not our decision to make. We, to the extent that we can be helpful in that process, we would like to be helpful, but ultimately those are decisions made by others. We know that those things, that it's coming down the line. For example, I talked with Superintendent Canaveros the other day about this exact topic, and getting this to the point where it's available to the district no later than December 1st, or as Superintendent Skorkowski mentioned earlier, it's not, he can't get his budget books done. So assisting in whatever way that we can to make sure that information gets there on a timely basis.
Okay, so just for my clarity, because I'm not clear on who others are, because I thought there was an interim committee, legislative, that had been dealing with the weighted funding formula, and Senator Denis was a part of that committee, and it's been an ongoing issue for several years in the legislature. So who are others, for the record, so we can be clear?
Someone is ultimately going to tell the district what the weighted funding formula is. All we're saying here is that we need to get that plugged in and to assist the district to get those into the budget books so that they can be prepared by January 15th. We are not making those decisions. We're not involved in the policy. That's your folks' job. We're trying to be implementers and transition assistance. That's in this case, that's all we're talking about doing.
Okay. And Chair, this is my actual final question. Superintendent came to the table and he mentioned, because I wrote him down, he said professional development expertise was an area that he needed potential help. He also mentioned curriculum, textbook allotments. And so I'm trying to figure out, how do you fit into any of those three categories? What would be the manner in which you would fit into those categories? Or was he not even speaking about this organization at all?
I don't know specifically what he had in mind with respect to those. Again, coming back and doing an assessment in the first 30-some days, exactly what we can be working on, should be working on. It may include maybe helping to identify resources, but those are not areas that we necessarily would have expertise ourselves.
Assemblywoman Neal, I just want to reiterate a couple things that have been mentioned previously. The primary focus of this Community Implementation Council and the management consultant will be to assist in the transition of the central administration to a customer service oriented organization. This Community Implementation Council will answer to this committee. So I just want you and everyone to make sure of that. This Community Implementation Council reports back to this committee, of which you are a member. Next question? Anyone? If no other questions, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for your presentations. I want John Bellardita and Stephen Oxberger to come up. They've been involved in these discussions, and I think their input on this process as representatives of the teachers and principals of this school district are very important.
Chair Roberson, members of the committee, Stephen Augsburger. I represent the Clark County Association of School Administrators and Professional Technical Employees. There have been lots of discussions since last summer about the necessity of a transition team. I think that is an important piece that still needs to happen to provide clarity as this issue moves forward. I would like to make one request. When this process started last October, administrators were absent on any committee that was working with this process, and we are absent again today. As Senator Denis spoke about the parent component, I would like to request that we have some kind of administrative input directly into that process. Senator Roberson, I know as this thing unfolded last summer, we were certainly involved, but I think it will speak well to our membership to have that kind of involvement at the ground level, particularly as we look at making central services or central administration more of a service organization to schools. I think that dialogue needs to be there with people that are practitioners receiving that service. So again, I would speak to the necessity of having a transition team, but I would like to add that one request for your consideration. Thank you.
Well, certainly I'll make the commitment to you, Stephen, that we'll have an opportunity to have your membership and you be very involved in this process all along the way. Mr. Villardita.
John Villardita, for the record. Thank you, Chair, and all members of the committee. So I just want to address a few things that I heard, but I want to put this in context. So we have a law, and we're at that point now where the law has to be implemented. And just to kind of give people a sense of the timeline we're operating on, today's October 18th, and I think you heard the superintendent refer to what regs are out there that drive the calendar now. The calendar is controlled by the law. So by January 15th, over 356 schools have to make a decision with $2 billion to develop a budget and to develop a plan. And the plan is around student achievement, and the budget is the resources to move that plan. This is October 18th. That's less than 12 weeks away. And in that 12 weeks, there's at least 3 weeks where people aren't even around. So we're effectively dealing with 9+ weeks. And in that time frame, here's the things that have to be done. To your point, Assemblyperson Diaz, I think the primary focus of implementation is to manage the conversion of central administration to a service agency. And I think what's critical to begin with is the building of a system of training for all of these people, administrators, educators, parents, support staff, even students. That is a huge undertaking. And I think what people have to understand is there is a culture, and you know this, there's a culture inside the district that when things get rolled out, there is skepticism as to whether or not it's going to be successful. And so building systems, first and foremost, around leadership development and training is absolutely critical, and that starts with Central. That's not being developed at the buildings yet. And we have about 12 weeks to accomplish that, so that the first order of business per law is essentially to develop plans and handle $2 billion of public money. That is nothing to take lightly, and I know nobody here takes lightly. So the necessity to have transition team to assist the district is absolutely paramount. I think the superintendent has outlined that need consistently throughout these proceedings. I know we've advocated for it. This is an organizational undertaking on a scale not done ever. The last time there was an effort to make organizational changes in the Clark County School District was in 2011. And the organizational change agent that had an education background, who also brought somebody else who had an education background, was Dwight Jones and Ken Turner. And I think history speaks for itself in terms of the outcome of those changes. So we're now at the point where we need assistance to help drive this transition. And so from CCA's perspective, we're okay with the committee as it has been formed. We're okay with the scope of their responsibility. They're not about developing policy. They're not about developing instruction. They're about building systems and making the appropriate organizational changes. And I think they're a great partner with the staff at the Clark County School District. I can tell you, I've been impressed with the leadership that's emerging from the Clark County School District to move this ball down the court. That has not always been there. And we cannot forget that. To your concern, Senator Denis, there was no plan 6 weeks ago. You didn't even adopt this 6 weeks ago. September 1 was the first time the Board of Education adopted, and then you had a subsequent meeting, and then the Legislative Commission ultimately adopted. So I think there's been discussions, and I think the discussions really reflected in this presentation was the interest on the part of community stakeholders, in this case led by a business leader, Glenn Christensen, to kind of like, what can we do to help contribute it? And you've all had some other very important business the last, week plus, dealing with another issue that affects the state. So I want to just share the excitement. I want to end with this. So not too long ago, after this became law, we essentially began, CCA I'm saying, some education efforts to try to inform all educators what this opportunity meant, along with the challenges. And so working with the superintendent, we said, you know what, we want to put a call out to leaders in the building and ask folks who wants to step up and take charge and be in leadership of these organizational teams. So again, working with the school district, we said, if we put that call out, we should try to frame some criteria of leadership that people should be looking at. And the first thing we said is you got to be an effective educator. You got to be somebody that's a good practitioner and a resource for others, colleagues look up to. Second thing was you got to be able to work with your administrator. Third thing is you got to be able to look at everybody, not just you or your classroom, but all stakeholders in that building. And then finally, you got to be able to foster a collaborative approach to the team. And in a matter of 4 days, we had 1,340 educators that were nominated by their colleagues that said, you know what, they fit this criteria, they should be in it. And so this was a very short time frame, and we said, listen, the next thing we got to do is, per law, come January 15th, these people have got to be trained, and they have to be in a position to take the responsibility the law has given them and make the appropriate changes. But then we had to figure out an election system. And so we now have figured out an election system. And again, we've worked with the school district on that. So, and we're not the only ones. The support staff have to do the same thing. The parental engagement is a huge undertaking. All of this stuff has to be done in less than 12 weeks. And we have a winter break and we have a holidays in there. And so I think, I just want to stress that to folks, having the assistance to come on board, to work with the school district, to not be, authorities on policy or instruction, but be experts to assist in partnership with the school district's team, the organizational changes that have to take place and the systems that have to be built. So we support this, and I would ask that each and every one of you support it too. I mean, this committee has had a track record of voting in a bipartisan way and has found consensus each step of the way, and I would ask that you do that today. The final thought I want to leave everybody with, and we've been really consistent about this, is once launching this, we think the next most important act on the part of legislative leaders is in the 2017 session to address the weighted funding formula. Because even though the law mandates that the Department of Education work with the school district now and come up with those weights by December 1 so that on January 15th these organizational teams have some kind of parameters to develop budgets, they still have to be funded. It still has to be funded. And I would ask that each and every one of you also keep that in mind moving forward in the 2017 session. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Villardita. Let's take one more 5-minute break and we'll come back. Okay, committee, thanks for staying so late today. So I would like to ask the committee to entertain two motions. The first motion would be to approve the formation of the Community Implementation Council with Glenn Christensen as chair and the membership of the council as outlined by Mr. Christensen in his presentation today. If there's someone on the committee willing to make that motion.
Second.
Assemblyman Silberkraus makes that motion, second by Senator Hardy. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay.
Nay.
Okay, let the record reflect it's 5 yea and 2 nay. So the motion passes. Second motion I would ask is for a motion to approve the hiring of TSC Square Group as the management consultant and authorize the LCB to enter into a contract with TSC Square Group based upon the proposal outlined today with a cap on the dollar amount being the $1,188,000. And I will accept a motion for that if there is one.
I would so move.
Okay, a motion by Assemblyman Stewart,
Second.
second by Senator Hardy. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Motion passes 5-2. Thank you, committee. We'll now go to public comment.
I know we've been here all night. Sorry, long day, but appreciate you letting me speak really quick. Annette Dawson Owens of Break Free CCSD. And love what we heard tonight here about vision and that we want to be known for having the best schools in the nation. Love that concept. We know we have succeeded when we have the very best schools here, when we can keep our teachers, when we produce students locally that are ready to be employed by the companies we're bringing here with our ever-changing 21st century jobs. And I just want to thank everyone here. I realize how much I do love this community and the members of this committee, the members of the district, the members of charter. We're all together. I love that we're coming together as a community. We are so excited to hear who our new associate superintendents are. We're excited to hear about our school organization teams that are forming. We're excited about this improved culture and climate and the quality of teachers. And most importantly, we are looking forward to our schools being empowered. Our principals, our teachers soaring and flying, doing what they do best, and even more importantly, our kids. It's all about our kids loving learning and loving school. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Annette. Any other public comment? Seeing none, just some final administrative matters. We will not schedule another meeting at this time. We will allow the Community Implementation Council to get organized, and then we will determine the best time to meet again to receive a report from the council. Any final remarks, committee members? Seeing none. And one other thing. I think this is the last committee meeting, most likely, for Assemblyman Stewart. I want to thank you for your great service to this state. Over these many years you've been serving Assembly District 22. You are my assemblyman. I'm going to miss you in that capacity, but I still expect to see you a lot, and I expect you to continue your wonderful public service in many other ways going forward. But thank you for your service on this committee. It's been invaluable. With that, committee, we are adjourned.